is Medicare's income-related monthly adjustment amount? Well, here to talk with me about that is Amy Shepard from Sensible Money. Amy, welcome.
Hi, Bob. Thanks so much.
Oh, it's thank you because this is one of the more complicated topics that we discuss when we're talking about Medicare. So we're eager to have you walk us through what this is, otherwise known as IRMAA.
Yes, well, it's not someone's great aunt or, a family friend or anything like that. As you mentioned, it stands for Income Related Monthly Adjustment Amount, kind of a mouthful. So IRMA's the acronym. And really what it is it's higher Medicare premiums for theoretically those with higher income.
All right, and so how does it work?
So it works. Medicare premiums in general are always based on your income 2 years prior. If you want to get really in the weeds, it's based on something called your modified adjusted gross income. So it's a slightly different tax calculation. I think most people feel fairly comfortable if they pull up a tax return, they look for their AGI, that's easy to find. But then some people say, well, what's that M in the beginning? What's a modified adjusted gross income? And really for Medicare purposes, what that is you take your adjusted gross income, but you add back in any tax exempt interest. So to give the details on that, if you look at your 1040 tax return, line 2A shows tax exempt interest. So you take that line 2A and you add it to your AGI, and that gets you to your modified adjusted gross income. So that's the explanation there. But how it works, logistically, is when somebody turns 65, their Medicare premiums are determined by their income, their tax return 2 years prior. So simple terms, you turn 65 this year, your premiums are based on your tax return from when you were 63. Next year, you're going to be 66. Your premiums are going to be based on your tax return when you were 64. So there's always this 2 year look back. A little bit of a side story there. Sometimes people are curious, well, why 2 years? Why don't they just look back at last year? That's most recent, right? And the reason for that has to do with tax filing. Not everybody files their taxes by April. Some people do extensions, and then just the timing makes it a little bit challenging there. So when you look back 2 years, it gives Medicare and Social Security enough time to actually look back and have something on file. So that's where it comes from. It's always a 2 year look back, and some good news there is it's done every year. So the year you turn 65, if they look back at your income from when you were 63 and it was really high, some people have been panicked saying like, oh, I'm going to be locked into these higher Medicare premiums for the rest of my life. And that is not the case. It's always a 2 year look back, and the premiums are adjusted potentially, each and every year based on that process.
Yeah, so there are six tiers of IRMAA. So your premium may be based on which income tier you fall into.
It works similar to tax brackets. There's tiers for single taxpayers, there's tiers for married taxpayers, but there are six. Currently for 2023, the lowest tier, so if you're lucky enough to pay the lowest premiums, it's just under $165 per month. And that is for single tax filers with income less than 97,000 about, and then for married taxpayers with income under 194,000. So on the low end, you pay about $165 a month per person for Medicare Part B. And then it goes all the way up to the highest tier, which is about $560 per month, per person if it's a couple.
Right. And if memory serves, I think the stats suggest that only 5% of Medicare beneficiaries that are actually subject to IRMAA, which is not necessarily a large number, but if you're affected, it certainly can be a lot. And I also should mention, too, it's not just Part B, it could be Part C as well as Part D that this IRMAA affects as well.
That is right. It's not just Part B. Part B, I think, is the biggest one people feel because that's the biggest chunk of premiums. But yes, it does. It can impact drug premiums as well.
So how do you know if you'd be subject to IRMAA?
So you get a lovely letter in the mail, usually. Hopefully it doesn't surprise you because hopefully as you've been getting ready to switch to Medicare, you've done some homework, and maybe if you didn't understand it, you still have heard about IRMAA. But typically somebody would get a letter in the mail, usually in the fall. So November is pretty common. I have personally had a lot of clients reaching out with those types of letters in the last 6 weeks or so. We're, first week in December right now, so November had a lot of IRMAA action, if you will. But that's the common approach: is you get a letter in the mail letting you know that based on your tax returns 2 year prior, you are subject to IRMAA. The letter explains, what tier you're expected to be in for the upcoming year, and it also includes instructions on what to do if your situation has changed and you don't think that it's appropriate for you to pay those higher premiums.
So maybe talk more about that. How can someone avoid being subject to IRMAA?
Yep. So there is what I often call an appeals process, but it is a fairly straightforward process, which I think is maybe I think it's a relief, because most things when you're dealing with Social Security or Medicare or taxes, nothing is ever simple, it seems. But there's a form. It's available online, so anybody can look at the form. The technical name is SSA 44, but it's a form that's about 8 pages long, has some instructions on it, and there's really 8 categories that allow you to essentially appeal that IRMAA, that higher Medicare premium, based on 8 different life-changing events. So kind of the standard stuff. I feel like most people are familiar with life-changing events when it comes to health insurance in particular, but the 8 options are marriage, divorce, death of a spouse, work stoppage, work reduction, loss of an income producing property, loss of pension income, and employer settlement payment. And in my experience as a retirement income planner, the most common one I help people with is work stoppage. In other words, retirement. So you go, there's instructions in the notice you get in the mail, but you can also go online and download the form. And essentially you just fill out what your reason is for your income changing. You have to explain why your income from 2 years prior is not relevant to your situation moving forward. And you check one of the 8 boxes. You have to provide an estimate of what your income is going to be moving forward. And then the document asks you to provide some kind of proof of income. So in my experience, for folks who are retiring, that can be challenging because there really is no proof until you file future tax returns showing that your income has been lowered. And so the good news there is that as part of this process, you can submit basically like an attestation form, a signed document under penalty of perjury that you are saying, I am truthfully saying that my income that you have on file from 2 years ago is not reflective of what it's going to be in the future, and the income information I'm putting in this form, is accurate to the best of my knowledge. So that's a nutshell of how the appeal process works, is it's just filling out one form.
So outside of those 8 things, there are some other ways that people can maybe avoid being subject to IRMAA with respect to tax planning.
There are some important ones. So I think a lot of people in the retirement space, especially, um, dare I say, get excited about opportunities like Roth conversions and things like that. I think tax planning is fun. And so there are some great opportunities to do tax planning in retirement. But one of the ways to do it most efficiently can be to monitor those IRMAA thresholds. So, sometimes people will want to do a Roth conversion and they'll want to convert up to the top of a certain tax bracket. But by doing that, they may also inadvertently cross over into another Medicare, IRMAA threshold. And so just being mindful of the rules is really helpful. If someone is doing a Roth conversion, or if somebody is taking money out of a 401k or an IRA, they just want to look at what those income levels are. And the worst thing that can happen is if you cross over, by $1, theoretically you're going to have to pay those higher Medicare premiums for 12 months. So if you can, just plan ahead and watch what those different thresholds are, you can try to stay within them.
So I want to talk about some real life examples, but first maybe amplify that a little bit. Does it ever make sense to intentionally pay the IRMAA?
So it can. That's a really interesting part of the retirement planning process as well. So for people who have accumulated a fair amount in tax deferred retirement accounts like 401ks and IRAs, what tends to happen is if we put together a retirement projection that spans the next 30 or 40 years, and we make conservative assumptions that those tax deferred accounts are going to grow over time, a lot of times what we see is that when somebody is in their 70s and their required minimum distributions start, often, RMDs is the acronym there, but a lot of times when RMDs start in your 70s, that can cause you to move up in tax brackets and also move up in Medicare IRMAA brackets. And so what we often do is we put together a plan that looks at somebody's, life expectancy, the next 3 or 4 decades. And if we see later in life, due to high RMDs, they may be subject to IRMAA for many, many years. What we can do is we can come back to the front end of retirement and we can do things like Roth conversions, or we can do things like IRA or 401k withdrawals early on. It might mean you take more money out of those tax deferred accounts now, and you do intentionally trigger IRMAA, 2 years from now, or, for the next several years if you do it ongoing. But what the benefit is maybe you do that and you pay IRMAA knowingly and intentionally for a few years, and in exchange later in life, now you don't have to pay IRMAA, or you have to pay less IRMAA, for the rest of your life. So it can absolutely make sense in the right situation.
All right. So I know you have plenty of real life client stories to tell. Do you want to walk us through some of them?
Yeah, most of them are nothing crazy. It's just kind of real life situations. And I definitely the most common one I deal with is retirement. So somebody has been used to, working with a fairly high income, and now they've retired, but their income is going to be quite a bit less without those paychecks coming in. And so that's a straightforward, fairly easy one to file that appeal form. You just, you use the work stoppage life-changing event, and you sign that attestation saying, my income moving forward is going to be less. That one happens all the time. Usually no complications there in terms of trying to reduce those Medicare premiums.
Yeah. And do you find that, just a quick question, do you find that the Social Security office will accept that appeal?
Yes, usually they do. In those kind of straightforward situations, I actually can't think of a single instance where somebody did retire and they had, the fairly straightforward situation of, hey, my income was higher when I'm working, now it's lower. Every time I've ever dealt with it, it has been approved. Um, Something important to note there is that it can be approved, but then taken away later on. And so I have seen that twice actually just in recent weeks. So a client filled out that appeal form. They said their income, in 2022 was going to be a certain amount, and the appeal was granted. But then they eventually filed their 2022 taxes, and the income on their tax return was higher than what they had told on that form. And so retroactively, they were required to pay those higher premiums the upcoming year. The good news is there was no penalties. I know sometimes people are worried about things like that, but it does catch up to you. The Social Security and Medicare want to make sure people are paying their fair share. But that's a really common one is retirement. I've also seen instances where somebody has a deferred compensation plan that gets paid out in a lump sum, typically after retirement, but that deferred compensation income on its own can trigger a high income year that may trigger IRMAA. Um, Severance packages are a common one as well. So, companies do layoffs. If you're lucky enough to have a severance package, that always feels great in the moment, but down the line, it could trigger one of those letters in the mail. Another common one is like sale of a rental property. So, many people have rental properties. They have that rental income, and then if they sell the property, it can be a double whammy. They sell the property, so they lose the rental income, but then they also have higher capital gains reported on a tax return. So those are things that can trigger IRMAA, and then one-time income as well. So in my spare time, I may enjoy playing a game of bingo every now and then. And gambling winnings is one-time income. I can't say I have ever won a bingo jackpot, but that is something that if somebody is at a casino or is lucky enough to win a lottery of some sort, that type of one-time income can also trigger IRMAA as well.
So it's an interesting and complicated topic. It seems like the best thing that people can do is be aware that this could happen to them, and perhaps plan for it as you think about expenses in retirement. Being surprised by the possibility of there being an IRMAA charge for even 1 year needs to be factored into the plan.
Yes, it is a big expense. I think most people are well aware that healthcare and taxes are two of the biggest, financial items in retirement, but it's not as simple as, just regular healthcare premiums. And Medicare is not as straightforward as, hey, you switch to Medicare and you're locked into this premium. There's more to it as we just discussed. So I definitely agree with planning ahead.
We covered a lot of ground, Amy. Anything we missed, or anything that just bears reemphasizing?
I think we covered it all, and hopefully it's helpful to everybody out there listening.